1 Kings 16. As we mentioned in the last chapter, let's call this one, I know your dad didn't, but what about you? Because in this chapter, we're going to get a look pretty much exclusively at the kings of Israel as they replace one another, largely through conspiracy, because as we mentioned before, each king was successively passing the reins on to his son, who was simply carrying on in the direction he had pointed him, which was typically toward disaster. And so as we mentioned with Jeroboam, he had his son Nadab pointed in an unhealthy direction, and it got bad enough that a pattern began to emerge. And over, it's going to say that God was upset with the kings of Israel, the northern 10 tribes, because they were not only wrecking themselves, they were wrecking the people that they were leading. As over and over, it is going to say, these kings made Israel to sin, whether it is Jeroboam, as we said, in his son Nadab, or Baasha, the one who is going to rise up and conspire against Jeroboam's household to essentially eliminate them. And the thing with Baasha being, even though he's been empowered to replace Jeroboam and his household, isn't going to be all that different from Jeroboam and his household, and he is going to continue in that downward spiral. Once again, not just him, but he is going to point his son in an unhealthy direction. And so even though he is going to get to live out his days, he is going to lead his son into an extremely short tenure, because one of his lieutenants, a man by the name of Zimri, is in turn going to conspire against him to repay Baasha's household for the conspiracy that he mounted against Jeroboam's household. But the habit of forming conspiracies against the previous king is going to stop with a man by the name of Omri, who once he gets word that Zimri has killed the king, he is going to surround the place where Zimri has set himself up as king. And now Zimri, realizing he is surrounded, is going to die burning in the king's quarters. Omri is then going to settle a civil war in the northern 10 tribes by taking over his next rival, then becoming king of Israel. He's going to have a very famous son by the name of Ahab. And even though Omri and Ahab are not going to so much follow suit in the line of poor leadership stretching all the way back to Jeroboam, they're going to go their own way. But they're simply going to put their own spin on unhealthy leadership, which reminded me of one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite Jesus rappers by the name of Bizzle, who says, and this is my paraphrase, if you're aiming at the wrong thing, even if you hit your target, you still lose. And so that seems to sum up this era in the kings of Israel, and really the kings of Israel, the northern 10 tribes moving forward. Since from this time until the time they're taken into captivity is going to be a succession of kings who are simply putting their own spin on aiming Israel in the wrong direction, leaving this dilemma. We can get a sense of success or even euphoria from getting our way, but as Bizzle has pointed out, it can simply desensitize us to the ways in which we are still failing. And so as we have mentioned before, to the degree that we are taking the baton, whether it is in a family, in a business, or maybe just in an organization in general, to the degree we are simply carrying on in the direction that we have been pointed, we might be making a mistake, understanding that the way in which an organization has built its success may be very different than the habits that have formed in the generation just before you, or maybe even a couple of generations back. And so in America now, I think from time to time I mentioned the one thing that everybody seems to be able to agree on is it's not in the condition we'd like it to be. And the reason why might have a lot to do with the second pattern that we see emerging here in chapter 16, which we've seen in the previous chapter, but we're going to see it attributed both to Omri and Ahab when it says they both did more evil than any king before them. See, when we allow our sense of normal to simply be controlled by what we were handed by the previous generation, we can lose track of just how abnormal our sense of normal has become. And so, even though in America we all have a sense that something has gone wrong, in a lot of ways I think we've all lost track with the degree to which, no matter how flawed America's beginnings were, integrity might have played a much larger role in the healthy parts of America's development than we realize. And in the next chapter, a prophet by the name of Elijah is going to remind Israel of just how huge a role integrity played in the years Israel spent becoming the greatest nation of the previous era.